Welcome back to AP U.S. History. This is Chapter 16, Part 2. We're looking at the Civil War. There probably won't be a lot of questions asked on the Civil War. By the way, the secret word for this video is Gettysburg. That's the secret word, Gettysburg. All right. Well, we last talked about Lincoln issuing the Emancipation Proclamation in January 1st, or on January 1st, 1863. The effect of the emancipation was more symbolic than anything. It did not free a single slave. Border states like Kentucky and Missouri and Maryland, Delaware, so forth, were allowed to keep their slaves. Of course, there were some people who criticized Lincoln and said he hadn't gone too far. Others said he didn't go far enough. The whole issue of involuntary servitude or slavery will be settled by the 13th Amendment, which will end slavery in the United States forever. Now, turning our attention to the West, things went a little bit better for the Union troops, mainly because they had a little bit better leadership. General Grant became Lincoln's most able general. His idea of warfare was total, and he wasn't going to worry about casualties. His objective was to win the battle. He captured Fort Henry and Fort Donelson in Tennessee, which makes things a little more secure in Kentucky. This cartoon shows Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation, and if you look at the picture carefully, he's motivated by demonic forces, according to the Southerners' point of view. Grant defeated the Confederates at Shiloh. The victory was very costly. Grant even wrote that he thought he might be relieved of command because of the number of casualties, but he obtains a victory over the Confederates. His goal was he had more men and he had more equipment, and he was going to use them, and he was going to wear the South out. Turning our focus back to the East, the war doesn't go very well. The Union forces will suffer losses at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, which are very costly. Will you have to know those two battles of the Civil War? Probably not. You probably will have to remember Antietam and Gettysburg. Those are pretty significant battles. Maybe Bull Run or Manassas, because that was the very first battle fought in the Civil War. Lee decides that he wants to invade the North to put pressure on them to come to the peace table and put an end to the war. At Gettysburg, it will be the bloodiest battle of the war, 53,000 casualties. From this point on, the South is doomed. They never again seriously threaten the North. The end of the war in the West, Vicksburg, which was on the Mississippi River and had to be taken, was the last holdout for the Confederates, and after 7 months of siege, the people at Vicksburg were reduced to eating rats. Many were sick, and eventually they capitulated to the Union forces. This shows the Battle of Gettysburg, the Union and Confederate forces. This breaks down the number of men that fought in the battle and the number of casualties on both sides. Pretty horrific. The victory for the North at Vicksburg opens the Mississippi to New Orleans. It will cut the Confederacy into two pieces, split it in two. It certainly boosted the morale of the Union troops. And then we have Sherman's march to the sea, and he will march through Georgia. He will lay waste to a 60-mile swath. even after the Civil War, the people in the South never forgave him for what they considered brutality and destruction. But he wanted to take the war to the South and make them realize that they were going to lose, and that it was one thing to fight on, but for homes to be burned and people to be killed, he wanted to force them to surrender. Eventually, he will capture Atlanta, um, and he will inflict horrible losses to the South. Once he has secured Georgia and Atlanta, he will move north through the Carolinas, um, and eventually he will hook up with Grant, who is fighting Lee in Virginia. The Copperheads were people who were Northerners. They were a Democratic faction that preached defeatism, and they were talked about disloyal things about the war. They wanted peace at any price. In a sense, they were traitors to the cause. Many seized by Union without warrants and held in prison without trial. Condemned Lincoln for fighting an unjust war and demanded the war be stopped. Of course, Lincoln did not pay heed to them. So Copperheads are somebody you probably will need to know from the Civil War. And they waged a campaign against Lincoln to smear his name. Now, the election of 1864 rolls around. Congressional committees on the conduct of the war were formed to find out why the Union hadn't done better. Samuel Chase is the one who's going to lead this anti-Lincoln assault. Many Republicans just distrusted Lincoln's ability to execute the war because they hadn't had too much success. Abolitionists demanded total emancipation, and of course he wasn't ready to do that. War Democrats supported Lincoln. Lincoln expected to lose this election. And if it hadn't been for success on the battlefield, he probably would. Many of the Union soldiers are going to vote for Lincoln. Copperheads hated Lincoln. Most Southerners living in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois despised him. The Democrats will nominate George McClellan. If you remember, he had been the commander of the Union troops twice, fired by Lincoln twice. The Union Party was formed, which was a coalition of Republicans and War Democrats, and Lincoln will be elected by the Union Party, not the Republican Party, which is kind of interesting. The Republican Party temporarily out of existence for this particular election, so it's the Democratic Party and the Union Party. Lincoln was nominated by the Union Party without opposition. Andrew Johnson will become his running mate, and after Lincoln is assassinated, he will become President of the United States. He was considered a loyal War Democrat from Tennessee, but on the ticket to attract War Democrats and border states, he was put there. One of the slogans they had was, "Don't swap horses in the middle of the river," which is, well, let's let Lincoln continue with the war until it's finished. The course of the war affected the elections. If Union forces were not making any progress in the battlefield at a particular point, and this is why Lincoln was in doubt in his own mind whether he would win election. But Northern victories will boost his political stock. Sherman's march to the sea, taking Atlanta and Savannah, and then marching north. General Sheridan defeated the Confederates at Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, which is going to boost the Union morale. And many of the Union troops voted for Lincoln. The results of the election: Lincoln defeated McClellan by an overwhelming majority in terms of electoral votes. The blue are the Confederate states. They did not vote. A couple of states went to McClellan, but If you see in the green, Lincoln carries almost all the states. Lincoln election assured a continuation of a total war. That is, they weren't going to let up on the gas pedal. They were going to drive the Confederacy into the ground. There wasn't going to be a partial victory. It wasn't going to be a negotiated peace. It was total surrender. That's what Lincoln was pushing for. Although I would have to say, then Lincoln's inaugural speech, he's talked about with no malice towards none, with charity for all. He would have been a much better president to have brought the Union or the Confederates back. He didn't want to necessarily punish them. Of course, when he was killed, there was great rejoicing in the South, but they would have been better served if he had stayed on as president. He would have had a lot of political capital, and he would have brought the Confederates back more gently into the Union, rather than a 11-year Reconstruction period. At the end of the war in the East, Grant promoted to lead all armies because of his success in the West. He will suffer huge losses, but he will have victories at Petersburg and Richmond. In early 1865, the Confederates tried to negotiate a peace between the two countries, but Lincoln was unwilling to accept anything short of unconditional surrender. Eventually, Lee will surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, and Confederates are allowed to go home as long as they and take their arms and horses as long as they swear an oath that they will not attack the Union again. This is a place where they surrendered at the Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th, 1865. And it was a very cordial meeting between Grant and Lee. The Confederates allowed to just go home and take care of their homes. Grant said the war is over. The rebels are our countrymen again. In 1865, Lincoln is, after he's been reelected, is going to be assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in Ford's Theater. And certainly the South didn't shed too many tears for this. Lincoln's Reconstruction policy was considered moderate compared to the radical Democrats who wanted to punish the South. The assassination made Northerners more bitter towards the South, especially rumors that Jeff Davis, president of the Confederacy, had plotted against Lincoln's death. In terms of results of the war, 620,000 soldiers dead, slavery abolished. Total cost of the war about $15 billion. In today's money, about $1.5 trillion. The nullification secession ideas died with the Confederacy, never to rise again. And this shows the casualties in the war. The idea of union and nationalism will triumph. The war economy laid a foundation for the Second Industrial Revolution. The Monroe Doctrine was upheld, which said other folks keep out of America. And we'll stop there.